Good afternoon, seventh grade. Sorry I can't be with you, but I thought we could still continue our Julian story. Okay, Dr. Jansen's office. I don't know how the heck Mr. Tushman found out about them. I don't think Jack or Augie would have been dumb enough to rat on me because they had started leaving me notes in my locker too. I mean, how stupid would you have to be to rat someone out about something that you were doing too? So here's what happened. A few days before the fifth grade nature retreat, which I was totally looking forward to, Mom got a phone call from Dr. Jansen, the headmaster of Beecher Prep. He said he wanted to discuss something with her and Dad and asked for a meeting. Mom assumed it probably had to do with Mr. Tushman, that maybe he was getting fired. So she was actually kind of excited about the meeting. They showed up for the appointment at 10 a.m. and they were waiting in Dr. Jansen's office when all of a sudden they see me walking into the office too. Miss Rubin had taken me out of class, asked me to follow her, and brought me there. I had no idea what was up. I had never even been to the headmaster's office before. So when I saw Mom and Dad there, I looked as confused as they looked. "What's going on?" Mom said to Ms. Rubin, before Miss Rubin could say anything. Mr. Tushman and Dr. Jansen came into the office. Everyone shook hands and they were all smiles as they greeted one another. Miss Rubin said she had to go back to class, but she would call Mom and Dad later to check in. And this surprised Mom. I could tell she started thinking that maybe this wasn't about Mr. Tushman getting fired after all. Then Dr. Jansen asked us to sit on the sofa opposite his desk. Mr. Tushman sat down in a chair next to us, and Dr. Jansen sat behind his desk. "Well, thank you so much for coming, Melissa and Jules," Dr. Jansen said to my parents. It was strange hearing him call them by their first names. I knew they all knew each other from being on the board, but it sounded weird. "I know how busy you are, and I'm sure you're wondering what this is all about." "Well, yes," said Mom, but her voice drifted off. Dad coughed into his hand. "The reason we asked you here today is because, unfortunately," Dr. Jansen continued, "we have a serious matter on our hands, and we'd like to figure out the best way to resolve it. Julian, do you have any inkling of what I might be talking about?" And he looked at me. I opened my eyes wide. "Me?" I snapped back. I snapped my head back and made a face. "No." Dr. Jansen smiled and sighed at me at the same time. He took off his glasses. "You understand," he said, looking at me, "we take bullying very seriously at Beecher Prep. There's zero tolerance for any kind of bullying. We feel that every single one of our students deserves the right to learn in a caring and respectful atmosphere." "Excuse me, but can someone tell me what's going on here?" Mom interrupted, looking at Dr. Jansen impatiently. "We obviously know the mission statement of Beecher Prep, Hal. We practically wrote it. Let's cut to the chase. What's going on?" "Evidence." Dr. Jansen looked at Mr. Tushman. "Why don't you explain, Larry?" he said. Mr. Tushman handed an envelope to Mom and Dad. Mom opened it and pulled out the last 3 Post-it notes I had left in Augie's locker. I knew immediately that's what they were, because these were actually pink Post-its and not yellow ones like all the others had been. So I thought, aha! So it was Augie who told Mr. Tushman about the Post-it notes. What a turd. Mom read through the notes quickly, raised her eyebrows, and passed them to Dad. He read them and looked at me. "You wrote these, Julian?" he said, holding the notes out for me. I swallowed. I looked at him kind of blankly. He handed me the notes and I just stared at them. Well, I answered. "Yeah, I guess. But Dad, they were writing notes too." "Who was writing notes?" asked Dad. "Jack and Augie," I answered. "They were writing notes to me too. It wasn't just me." "But you started the note writing, didn't you?" asked Mr. Tushman. "Excuse me," Mom interjected angrily. "Let's not forget that it was Jack Will who punched Julian in the mouth, not the other way around. Obviously, there's going to be residual anger." "How many of those notes did you write, Julian?" Dad interrupted, tapping on the Post-it notes I was holding. "I don't know," I said. "It was hard for me to get the words out. Like 6 or something. But the other ones weren't bad. These notes are worse than the other ones I wrote. The other ones weren't so." And my voice kind of drifted off as I reread what I'd written on the 3 notes. "Yo, Darth, hideous. You're so ugly you should wear a mask every day." And "I hate you, freak." And the last one, I bet your mother wishes you'd never been born. You should do everybody a favor and die. Of course, looking at them now, they seemed a lot worse than when I wrote them. But I was mad then, super mad. I had just gotten one of their notes and... Wait, I said, and I reached into my pocket. I found the last post-it that Augie and Jack had left for me in my locker just yesterday. It was kind of crumpled up now, but I held it out to Mr. Tushman to read. Look, they wrote mean stuff to me, too. Mr. Tushman took the post-it, read it quickly, and handed it to my parents. My mom read it and then looked at the floor. My dad read it and shook his head, puzzled. He handed me the post-it, and I reread it. Julian, you're so hot. Summer doesn't like you, but I want to have your babies. Smell my armpits. Love, Beulah. Who the heck is Beulah? Asked Dad. Never mind, I answered. I can't explain. I handed the post-it back to Mr. Tushman, who gave it to Dr. Jansen to read. I noticed he actually tried to hide a smile. Julian, said Mr. Tushman, the 3 notes you wrote don't compare at all to this note in content. I don't think it's for anyone else to judge the semantics of a note, said Mom. It doesn't matter whether you think one note is worse than the other. It's how the person reading the note reads it. The fact is, Julian's had a little crush on this Summer girl all year long, and it probably hurt his feelings. Mom, I yelled, and I covered my face with my hands. That's so embarrassing. All I'm saying is that a note can be hurtful to a child whether you see it or not, Mom said to Mr. Tushman. Are you kidding me? Answered Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. He sounded angrier than I had ever heard him before. Are you telling me you don't find the post-its your son wrote completely horrifying? Because I do. I'm not defending the notes, answered Mom. I'm just reminding you that it was a 2-way street. You have to realize that Julian was obviously writing those notes as a reaction to something. Look, said Dr. Jansen, holding his hand out in front of him like a crossing guard. There's no doubt there's some history here. Those notes hurt my feelings, I said, and I didn't mind that I sounded like I was going to cry. I don't doubt that their notes hurt your feelings, Julian, Dr. Jansen answered. And you were trying to hurt their feelings. That's the problem with stuff like this. Everyone keeps trying to top one another, and then things escalate out of control. Exactly, said Mom, and it almost sounded like she screamed it. But the fact is, Dr. Jansen continued, holding up his finger, there is a line, Julian. There is a line. And your notes cross that line. They're completely unacceptable. If Augie had read these notes, how do you think he'd feel? He was looking at me so intensely that I felt like disappearing under the sofa. You mean he hasn't read them? I asked. No, answered Dr. Jansen. Thank goodness someone reported the notes to Mr. Tushman yesterday, and he opened Augie's locker and intercepted them before Augie ever saw them. I nodded and lowered my head. I have to admit I was glad Augie hadn't read them. I guess I knew what Dr. Jansen meant about crossing the line. But then I thought, so if it wasn't Augie who ratted me out, who was it? We were all quiet for a minute or two. It was awkward, beyond belief. The verdict. Okay, said Dad finally, rubbing his palm over his face. Obviously, we understand the seriousness of the situation now, and we will do something about it. I don't think I've ever seen Dad look so uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Dad. Well, we have some recommendations, answered Dr. Jansen. Obviously, we want to help everyone involved. Thank you for understanding, said Mom, getting her pocketbook ready as if she were getting up. But there are consequences, said Mr. Tushman, looking at Mom. Excuse me? She shot back at him. As I said in the beginning, Dr. Jansen interjected, the school has a very strict anti-bullying policy. Yeah, we saw how strict it was when you didn't expel Jack Will for punching Julian in the mouth. Mom answered quickly. You take that, Mr. Tushman. Oh, come on. That was completely different, Mr. Tushman answered dismissively. Oh, answered Mom. Punching someone in the face isn't bullying to you? Okay, said Dad, raising his hand to keep Mr. Tushman from answering. Let's just cut to the chase, okay? What exactly are your recommendations, Hal? Dr. Jansen looked at him. Julian is being suspended for 2 weeks, he said. What? Yelled Mom, looking at Dad. But Dad didn't look back. In addition, said Dr. Jansen, we're recommending counseling. Nurse Molly has the names of several therapists who we think Julian should see. This is outrageous, interrupted Mom, steaming. Wait, I said. You mean I can't go to school? Not for 2 weeks, answered Mr. Tushman, starting immediately. What about the trip to the nature retreat, I asked. You can't go, he answered coldly. No, I said, and now I was really about to cry. I want to go to the nature retreat. I'm sorry, Julian, Dr. Jansen said gently. This is absolutely ridiculous, said Mom, looking at Dr. Jansen. Don't you think you're overacting a little? That kid didn't even read the notes. That's not the point, answered Mr. Tushman. I'll tell you what I think, said Mom. This is because you admitted a kid into the school who shouldn't have been admitted into the school in the first place. And you broke the rules to do it. And now you're just taking this out on my kid because I'm the one who had the guts to call you on it. Melissa, said Dr. Jansen, trying to calm her down. These children are too young to deal with things like this. Facial deformities, disfigurement, Mom continued, talking to Dr. Jansen. You must see that. Julian's had nightmares because of that boy. Did you know that? Julian has anxiety issues. Mom, I said, clenching my teeth. The board should have been consulted about whether Beecher Prep was the right place for a child like that, Mom continued. That's all I'm saying. We're just not set up for it. There are other schools that are, but we're not. You can choose to believe that if you want, answered Mr. Tushman, not looking at her. Mom rolled her eyes. This is a witch hunt, she muttered quietly, looking out the window. She was fuming. I had no idea what she was talking about. Witches? What witches? Okay, Hal, you said you had some recommendations, Dad said to Dr. Jansen. He sounded gruff. Is that it? 2 weeks suspension and counseling? We'd also like for Julian to write a letter of apology to August Pullman, said Mr. Tushman. Apology? For what exactly? Answered Mom. He wrote some stupid notes. Surely he's not the only kid in the world who's ever written a stupid note. It's more than a stupid note, answered Mr. Tushman. It's a pattern of behavior. He started counting on his fingers. It's the making faces behind the kid's back. It's the game he initiated where if someone touches Augie, he has to wash his hands. I can't believe Mr. Tushman even knew about the plague game. How do teachers know so much? It's social isolation, Mr. Tushman continued. It's creating a hostile atmosphere. And you know for a fact that it's Julian who initiated all this, asked Dad. Social isolation? Hostile atmosphere? Are you saying that Julian was the only kid who wasn't nice to this boy? Are you suspending every kid who stuck his tongue out at this kid? Good one, Dad. Scored 1 for the Albanses. Doesn't it trouble you at all that Julian doesn't even seem to be showing the least bit of remorse? Said Mr. Tushman, squinting at Dad. Okay, let's just stop right here, Dad said quietly, pointing his finger in Mr. Tushman's face. Please, everyone, said Dr. Jansen. Let's calm down a bit. Obviously, this is difficult. After all we've done for this school, Mom answered, shaking her head. After all the money and the time we've put into the school, you would think we'd just get a little bit of consideration? And she put her thumb and her index finger together. Just a little? Dad nodded. He was still looking angrily at Mr. Tushman, but then he looked at Dr. Jansen. Melissa's right, he said. I think we deserved a little better than this, Hal. A friendly warning would have been nice. Instead, you call us in here like children. He stood up. We deserved better. I'm sorry you feel that way, said Dr. Jansen, standing up as well. The Board of Trustees will hear about this, said Mom. She got up too. I'm sure they will, answered Dr. Jansen, crossing his arms and nodding. Mr. Tushman was the only adult still sitting down. The point of the punishment, the point of the suspension isn't punitive, he said quietly. We're trying to help Julian too. He can't fully understand the ramifications of his actions if you keep trying to justify them away. We want him to feel some empathy. You know, I've heard just about enough, said Mom, holding her palm in front of Mr. Tushman's face. I don't need parenting advice, not from someone who doesn't have kids of his own. You don't know what it's like to see your kid having a panic attack every time he shuts his eyes to go to sleep, okay? You don't know what it's like. Her voice cracked a bit like she was going to cry. She looked at Dr. Jansen. This affected Julian deeply, Hal. I'm sorry if it's not politically correct to say, but it's the truth. And I'm just trying to do what I think is best for my son. That's all. Do you understand?" "Yes, Melissa," Dr. Jansen answered softly. Mom nodded. Her chin quivered. Are we done here? Can we go now?" "Sure," he answered. "Come on, Julian," she said, and she walked out of the office. I stood up. I admit I wasn't exactly sure what was going on. "Wait, is that it?" I asked. "What about my things? All my stuff's in my locker." "Miss Rubin will get your things ready and she'll get them to you later this week," answered Dr. Jansen. He looked at Dad. "I'm really sorry it came to this, Jules." He held out his hand for a handshake. Dad looked at his hand but didn't shake it. He looked at Dr. Jansen. "Here's the only thing I want from you, Hal," he said quietly. "I want that all of this, be kept confidential. Is that clear? It doesn't go beyond this room. I don't want Julian turned into some kind of anti-bullying poster boy by the school. No one is to know he's been suspended. We'll make up some excuse about why he's not in school, and that's it. Are we clear, Hal? I don't want him made into an example. I'm not going to stand by while this school drags my family's reputation through the mud. Oh, by the way, in case I hadn't mentioned it before, Dad's a lawyer." Dr. Jansen and Mr. Tushman exchanged looks. "We are not looking to make an example of any of our students," Dr. Jansen answered. "This suspension really is about a reasonable response to unreasonable behavior." "Give me a break," answered Dad, looking at his watch. "It's a massive overreaction." Dr. Jansen looked at Dad, and then he looked at me. "Julian," he said, looking me right in the eye, "can I ask you something point blank?" I looked at Dad, who nodded. I shrugged. "Do you feel at all remorseful for what you've done?" Dr. Jansen asked me. I thought about it a second. I could tell all the grown-ups were watching me, waiting for me to answer something magical that would make this whole situation better. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm really sorry I wrote those last notes." Dr. Jansen nodded. "Is there anything else you feel remorseful for?" he asked. I looked at Dad again. I'm not an idiot. I knew what he was dying for me to say. I just wasn't going to say it. So I looked down and shrugged. "Can I ask you this then?" said Dr. Jansen. "Will you consider writing Augie a letter of apology?" I shrugged again. "How many words does it have to be?" was all I could think to say. I knew the moment I said it that I probably shouldn't have. Dr. Jansen looked at my dad, who just looked down. "Julian," said Dad, "go find Mom. Wait for me by the reception area. I'll be out in a second." Just as I closed the door on my way out, Dad started whispering something to Dr. Jansen and Mr. Tushman. It was only a hushed, angry whisper. When I got to the reception area, I found Mom sitting on a chair with her sunglasses on. I sat down next to her. She rubbed my back, but she didn't say anything. I think she'd been crying. I looked at the clock, 10:20 a.m. Right about now, Miss Rubin was probably going over the results of yesterday's quiz in science class. As I looked around the lobby, I had a blip of a memory. That day before school started, when me, Jack Will, and Charlotte had met up here before meeting our welcome buddy for the first time. I remember how nervous Jack had been that day, and how I didn't even know who Augie was. So much had happened since then. Out of school. Dad didn't say anything when he met us in the lobby. We just walked out the doors without saying goodbye, even to the security guard at the reception desk. It was weird leaving the school when everyone was still inside. I wondered what Miles and Henry would think when I didn't come back to class. I hated that I was going to miss PE that afternoon. My parents were quiet the whole way back to the house. We live on the Upper West Side, which is about a half-hour drive from Beecher Prep, but it felt like it took forever to get home. "I can't believe I got suspended," I said, just as we pulled into the parking garage in our building. "It's not your fault, honey," answered Mom. "They have it in for us." "Melissa," Dad yelled, which surprised Mom a bit. "Yes, of course it's his fault. This whole situation is his fault. Julian, what the heck were you thinking writing notes like that?" "He was goaded into writing them," answered Mom. We had pulled to a stop inside the garage. The parking garage attendant was waiting for us to get out of the car, but we didn't get out. Dad turned around and looked at me. I'm not saying I think the school handled this right, he said. 2 weeks suspension is ridiculous. But Julian, you should have known better. I know, I said. It was a mistake, Dad. We all make mistakes, said Mom. Dad turned back around. He looked at Mom. Jansen's right, Melissa. If you keep trying to justify his actions, that's not what I'm doing, Jules. Dad didn't answer right away. Then he said, I told Jansen that we're pulling Julian out of Beecher Prep next year. Mom was literally speechless. It took a second for what he said to hit me. You what? I said. Jules, Mom said slowly. I told Jansen that we'll finish out this year at Beecher Prep, Dad continued calmly, but next year, Julian's going to a different school. I can't believe this, I cried. I love Beecher Prep, Dad. I have friends, Mom. I'm not sending you back to that school, Julian, Dad said firmly. No way am I spending another dime on that school. There are plenty of other great private schools in New York City. Mom, I said. Mom wiped her hand across her face. She shook her head. Don't you think we should have talked about this first, she said to Dad. You don't agree, he countered. She rubbed her forehead with her fingers. No, I do agree, she said, softly nodding. Mom, I screamed. She turned around in her seat. Honey, I think Daddy's right. I can't believe this, I yelled, punching the car seat. They have it in for us now, she continued, because we complained about the situation with that boy. But that was your fault, I said through clenched teeth. I didn't tell you to try and get Augie thrown out of the school. I didn't want you to get Tushman fired. That was you. And I'm sorry about that, sweetheart, she said meekly. Julian, said Dad, your mom did everything she did to try and protect you. It's not her fault you wrote those notes, now is it? No, but if she hadn't made such a big stink about everything, I started to say. Julian, do you hear yourself, said Dad. Now you're blaming your mom. Before you were blaming the other boys for writing those notes. I'm starting to wonder if what they were saying is right. Don't you feel any remorse for what you've done? Oh, of course he does, said Mom. Melissa, let him answer for himself, Dad said loudly. No, okay, I yelled. I'm not sorry. I know everybody thinks I should be. I'm sorry for being mean to Augie. I'm sorry I talked smack about him. I'm sorry I dissed him. But I'm not. So sue me. Before Dad could respond, the garage attendant knocked on the car window. Another car had pulled into the garage, and they needed us to get out. Spring. I didn't tell anyone about the suspension. When Henry texted me a few days later asking why I wasn't in school, I told him I had strep throat. That's what we told everyone. It turns out 2 weeks suspension isn't so bad, by the way. I spend most of my time at home watching SpongeBob reruns and playing Knights of the Old Republic. I was still supposed to keep up on my schoolwork, though, so it's not like I totally got to goof off. Ms. Rubin dropped by the apartment one afternoon with all my locker stuff, my textbooks, my loose-leaf book, and all the assignments I would need to make up. And there was a lot. Everything went really well with social studies and English, but I had so much trouble doing the math homework that Mom got me a math tutor. Despite all the time off, I really was excited about going back. Or at least I thought I was. The night before my first day back, I had one of my nightmares again. Only this time it wasn't me who looked like Augie, it was everyone else. I should have taken that as a premonition. When I got back to school, as soon as I arrived, I could tell something was up. Something was different. The first thing I noticed is that no one was really excited about seeing me again. I mean, people said hello and asked me how I was feeling, but no one was like, dude, I missed you. I would have thought Miles and Henry would be like that, but they weren't. In fact, at lunchtime, they didn't even sit at our usual table. They sat with Amos. So I had to take my tray and find a place to squeeze in at Amos's table, which was kind of humiliating. Then I overheard the three of them talking about hanging out at the playground after school and shooting hoops, but no one asked me to come. The weirdest thing of all, though, was that everyone was being really nice to Augie, like ridiculously nice. It was like I had entered the portal to a different dimension, an alternate universe in which Augie and I had changed places. Suddenly, he was the popular one, and I was the outsider. Right after last period, I pulled Henry over to talk to him. Yo, dude, Why is everyone being so nice to the freak all of a sudden? I asked. Okay, said Henry, looking around kind of nervously. Yeah, well, people don't really call him that anymore. And then he told me all about the stuff that had gone down at the nature retreat. Basically, what had happened was that Augie and Jack got picked on by some 7th grade bullies from another school. Henry, Miles, and Amos had rescued them, got into a fight with the bullies, like with real punches flying, and then they all escaped through a corn maze. It sounded really exciting as he was telling me. I got mad all over again that Mr. Tushman had made me miss it. Oh man, I said excitedly. I wish I'd been there. I totally would have creamed those jerks. Wait, which jerks? The 7th graders? Really? He looked puzzled, though Henry always looked a little puzzled. Because I don't know, Julian. I kind of think that if you had been there, we might not have rescued them at all. You probably would have been cheering for the 7th graders. I looked at him like he was an idiot. No, I wouldn't, I said. Seriously, he said, giving me a look. No, I said. Okay, he answered, shrugging. Yo, Henry, are you coming? Amos called out from down the hallway. Look, I gotta go, said Henry. Wait, I said. Gotta go? Want to hang out tomorrow after school? Not sure, he answered, backing away. Text me tonight and we'll see. As I watched him jog away, I had this terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. Did he really think I was that awful? That I would have been rooting for some 7th graders while they beat Augie up? Is that what other people think? That I would have been that much of a dirtwad? Look, I'm the first one to say I don't like Augie Pullman, but I would never want to see him get beat up or anything. I mean, come on, I'm not a psycho. It really annoyed me that that's what people thought about me. I texted Henry later on, yo, by the way, I would never have just stood by and let those creeps beat Augie and Jack up. But he never texted me back. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. Oh, one more, because then I'll start a new section. We have a couple minutes. Mr. Tushman. That last month in school was awful. It's not like anyone was out and out mean to me, but I felt iced out by Amos and Henry and Miles. I just didn't feel popular anymore. No one really ever laughed at my jokes. No one wanted to hang out with me. I felt like I could disappear from the school and nobody would miss me. Meanwhile, Augie was walking down the hallways like some cool dude getting high-fived by all the jocks in the upper grades. Whatever. Mr. Tushman called me into his office one day. How's it going, Julian? He asked me. Fine. Did you ever write that apology letter like I asked you to? My dad says I'm leaving the school, so I don't have to write anything, I answered. Oh, he said, nodding. I guess I was hoping you'd want to write it on your own. Why? I said back. Everyone thinks I'm this big dirtbag anyway. What the heck is writing a letter going to accomplish? Julian, look, I know everyone thinks I'm this unfeeling kid who doesn't feel remorse, I said, using air quotes. Julian, said Mr. Tushman, no one. Suddenly, I felt like I was about to cry, so I just interrupted him. I'm really late for class, and I don't want to get in trouble, so can I please go? Mr. Tushman looked sad. He nodded. Then I left his office without looking back. A few days later, we received an official notice from the school telling us that they had withdrawn their invitation to re-enroll me in this fall. I didn't think it mattered, since Dad had told them we weren't going back anyway. But we still hadn't heard from the other schools I had applied to. And if I didn't get into any of them, we had just planned on my going back to Beecher Prep. But now, that was impossible. Mom and Dad were furious at the school, like crazy mad. Mostly because they had already paid the tuition for the next year in advance, and the school wasn't planning on returning the money. So, that's the thing with private schools. They can kick you out for any kind of reason. Luckily, a few days later, we did find out that I'd gotten into my first choice private school, not far from where I lived. I'd have to wear a uniform, but that was okay. Better than having to go to Beecher Prep every day. Needless to say, we skipped the graduation ceremony at the end of the year. All right, 7th grade. I'll end here because it starts a whole new part. It talks about Julian's summer after that unforgettable 5th grade year. I won't see you next week because it will be early dismissal. It'll be the day before Halloween. So everyone have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.